Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bookercast, the podcast where books come to life.
And I'm so excited to dive into another amazing story with all of you.
Whether you're a bookworm or just love a good story, this is the place for you.
Every episode, we explore incredible books, talk about their stories and characters, and share insights that'll make you fall in love with reading all over again.
All right, let's not keep you waiting any longer. Get comfortable, and let's jump right into it.
Sounds good.
All right, so are you ready to dive into Rita Bullwinkel's headshot
Definitely.
before your book club meeting?
Yes, we're right there with you.
Ready to unpack this knockout of a novel?
We've got
We've got excerpts and some background on Bullwinkel's style to help you really impress those fellow readers.
It's a fascinating blend.
I have to say, the way
Coming-of-age grit.
Bullwinkle structures this novel
And a touch of the surreal.
is unlike anything I've seen before.
All set in the world of youth women's boxing.
Instead of a straightforward narrative, it's structured around the semifinalist round
Yeah.
of this boxing tournament called the Daughters of America.
Mm-hmm.
Each chapter is like its own fight card, you know?
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because it allows her to jump between different fighters' perspectives, sometimes even within the same chapter.
Right.
You get this multifaceted view, not just of the fight itself,
Yeah.
but of the lives and anxieties these young women carry outside the ring.
So much more than just a sports story, right?
Absolutely. Bullwinkle uses this hyper-specific world of youth boxing to explore these universal themes like self-perception,
Yeah.
ambition, and how societal expectations can feel like a weight class you never signed up for.
Okay, so before we get into the ring with these characters, let's set the stage.
Okay.
Headshot came out in 2024, and it's actually Bullwinkle's first novel.
All right.
But here's the thing. She's not a newbie to the literary scene.
Right.
Her short story collection, Belly Up, won the Believer Book Award.
And what's interesting is Headshot is dedicated for my sister Audrey, witness to it all.
Oh, wow.
It makes you wonder how much of Bullwinkle's own life experiences,
Yeah.
maybe even her relationship with her sister, informed this story.
I love picking up on those little hints, those personal connections authors weave in.
Yeah.
And speaking of connections, let's not forget that killer epigraph from Games for Girls by Thomas Heff.
Oh, yeah.
Scanalon, that history scholar.
Yeah.
Talk about setting the tone.
Definitely.
It reminds us that women competing, pushing boundaries is nothing new.
Exactly. It adds this whole other layer of context.
Right.
Reminding us that these themes of ambition and self-discovery have been playing out for centuries.
Okay, so let's jump into the action.
Right.
The story takes place over just 2 days, July 14th and 15th, at Bob's Boxing Palace in Reno, Nevada.
Wow.
Can you already picture it? The lights, the sweat,
I know.
the anticipation in the air.
And the novel really captures that atmosphere.
Yeah.
You're right there in the thick of it, feeling the energy, the tension,
Exactly.
the rawness of each match.
So let's talk about some of the matchups that really stood out to me.
Okay.
First, you've got Artemis Victor versus Andy Taylor.
Right.
This fight sets the stage for the whole tournament.
What's so captivating about their fight is that it's a clash of styles, both in the ring and in their personal lives.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
Artemis, she's this polished, almost regal boxer.
Mm-hmm.
She comes from a family of champions.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this sense of, I don't know, almost entitlement.
Right.
Like winning is in her blood.
Right. But there's also a coldness to her, a detachment.
Yeah.
It's like she's going through the motions, but not fully connecting with the emotional stakes of the fight.
And then you have Andy, who's the complete opposite.
Yeah.
She's scrappy, unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
She fights with this raw, almost desperate energy.
And you learn that she's haunted by this tragic incident from her past.
Right.
The accidental drowning of a child she witnessed.
Wow.
Boxing for her becomes this outlet,
Yeah.
a way to reclaim a sense of agency in a world that feels chaotic and out of control.
It's heartbreaking, but also so powerful.
You
You're rooting for her to find some kind of peace, some resolution.
are.
And the way Bullwinkle uses water imagery to connect Andy's past trauma to her present struggles in the ring is just masterful.
It's subtle, but so effective.
Yeah.
For example, there's a line where Bullwinkle describes Andy's fighting style as a drowning man's thrashing, desperate, and unpredictable.
Wow.
It immediately connects the reader back to that drowning incident, highlighting the emotional weight Andy carries into each fight.
Oh, that's a great catch.
Yeah.
It's those little details that really make a story stick with you, you know?
Right, and that's one of Bullwinkle's strengths as a writer.
Yes.
She layers these symbolic elements throughout the narrative,
Sure.
adding depth and complexity to the characters and their journeys.
All right, ready to move on to another fight that really packed an emotional punch.
Let's do it. I'm all ears.
Okay, so we've got Rachel DeRico going up against Kate Heffer.
Okay.
Now, Rachel is a character who really embodies this concept of not caring what other people think.
Right.
She's got this, what she calls a weird hat philosophy.
Ah, yes, the weird hat philosophy. It's essentially her way of saying, I'm going to be myself, even if it makes people uncomfortable.
Right.
She deliberately dresses and acts in unconventional ways.
Yeah.
And it becomes a source of power for her.
It's like she's reclaiming the word weird and turning it into a badge of honor.
Exactly. And it's such a refreshing perspective,
Yep.
especially in a world that's constantly trying to fit us into neat little boxes.
But then you have Kate, who's very image conscious.
Right.
She sees boxing as a way to control her narrative to achieve recognition and success on her own terms.
But what's interesting is she completely crumbles under pressure in the ring.
Yeah.
It's like her carefully constructed world starts to fall apart.
It's a reminder that sometimes the pressure to perform, to live up to expectations,
Yeah.
can be our own worst enemy.
And this fight in particular highlights the psychological toll that competition can take,
Right.
even when it's something you're passionate about.
It's not just about physical strength.
Right.
It's about mental fortitude
Yeah.
and how we deal with those moments when we feel like we're falling apart.
Okay, so we've talked about Artemis Adandi, Rachel, and Kate. Are you ready to move on to another pair of fighters?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm ready to see who else Bullwinkel throws into the ring.
All right, how about we delve into the fight between Rose Mueller and Tanya Ma?
Okay.
Now, this match explores a completely different dimension of self-discovery.
Yeah, this one felt very different.
Mm-hmm.
Rose is quiet, almost stoic. She finds solace and strength in her religious faith, and it's woven into every aspect of her training and her approach to boxing.
And then you have Tanya, who's drawn to acting and the transformative power of performance.
Yeah.
She's constantly trying on different personas, exploring different ways of being in the world.
Right.
It's fascinating to see how those two seemingly disparate worlds, faith and performance, collide in the ring.
It's like they're both searching for truth and meaning,
Right.
but through vastly different lenses.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how our own personal beliefs and experiences shape how we approach challenges and find our place in the world.
It's also interesting to note how Bullwinkel weaves in stream of consciousness narration here.
Yeah.
For example, in one passage, Tanya's thoughts drift back to a place she was in, where a mother abandons her daughters.
Okay.
This mirroring of her own life, where her mother walked out when she was young, adds a layer of depth and complexity to her character.
It's like we're getting a glimpse into her inner world, her anxieties,
Exactly.
and how she uses acting to process those emotions.
And it makes you realize that everyone has a story,
Yes.
a history that shapes who they are,
Yeah.
even the seemingly confident and self-assured characters.
All right, so we've covered some key matches and the amazing characters Bullwinkel brings to life.
Okay,
But before we move on, I have to ask,
go for it.
what about the title headshot? I mean, it's such a powerful image,
Yeah.
and it seems like it has multiple meanings throughout the story.
You're right. It's not just about the physical blows these fighters take in the ring.
Right.
It's also about the mental and emotional impact of competition.
Uh-huh.
The way these girls' internal worlds are shaped by their experiences.
It's like those headshots are leaving marks that go beyond the physical.
Yeah, exactly.
They're impacting their self-perception, their relationships,
Yeah.
their entire sense of who they are.
And it makes you wonder, what kind of headshots do we all experience in life? What are those moments that leave a lasting impact on how we see ourselves and the world around us?
A great question to ponder as we dive deeper into this novel. Okay, so we've got these incredible characters, this unique structure, and this multi-layered title. Where do we go from here? I'm hooked.
Well, I think it's time to take a closer look at some of the recurring themes and symbols Bullwinkel uses to weave this intricate tapestry of a story.
All right, lead the way. I'm ready to see how it all unfolds.
Okay. One of the most prominent themes is this idea of self-perception. How do these young women see themselves both inside and outside the ring?
Yeah.
And how do those perceptions shape their actions and relationships?
It's like they're all trying to figure out who they are in this world.
Right? Precisely.
And boxing becomes this proving ground,
Yeah.
this space where they can test their limits and confront their vulnerabilities.
And it's not just about physical strength, but also about emotional resilience.
Right.
How do they handle setbacks? How do they deal with the pressure to perform?
You see some characters like Artemis, who initially appear incredibly confident.
Mm-hmm.
But as the story unfolds, you realize that her seemingly effortless grace is masking a deep-seated fear of failure.
Right. It's like she's built this persona around winning,
Yeah.
around being the best.
Right.
But what happens when that facade cracks?
Yeah.
What happens when she's forced to confront her own limitations?
And then you have characters like Andi who wear their vulnerabilities on their sleeve.
Right.
She's not afraid to show her pain, her anger, her desperation.
And that rawness, that authenticity makes her so compelling.
It does.
She's not trying to be anyone other than herself, even when it's messy and uncomfortable.
It's a reminder that vulnerability can be a source of strength.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
takes courage to show up in the world as your true self, flaws and all.
And that ties into another major theme Bullwinkle explores, societal expectations.
Yeah.
How do these young women navigate the pressures to conform, to fit into predefined roles, especially within the context of a sport that's often seen as masculine?
It's like they're constantly battling against these invisible forces that tell them how they should look,
Exactly.
act, and even feel.
And it's fascinating to see how each character responds to those pressures.
Yeah.
Some, like Rachel, revel outright, embracing their individuality, even if it makes others uncomfortable.
Weird hat philosophy is such a great example of that.
Uh,
She's refusing to play by society's rules, choosing instead to define her own terms.
right. And then you have characters like Kate who try to conform
Yeah.
to fit into the mold, but in doing so, they suppress parts of themselves.
Yes.
And ultimately, it leads to a sense of dissatisfaction and inner turmoil.
It's a reminder that trying to be someone you're not is exhausting
Yeah.
and ultimately unfulfilling.
And speaking of expectations, there's this really interesting passage where Rachel talks about witnessing a house literally melt from a broken pipe.
Really?
She says there are people who, just by looking at disasters, implicate themselves in the violence at hand. It's such a striking image.
It is.
And it makes you think about how we all process trauma and hardship differently.
It's like she's saying that some people feel compelled to make sense of chaos, to find meaning in the midst of destruction.
Right. And it makes you wonder, how do our own experiences with trauma shape how we see the world,
Yeah.
how we interact with others?
It's a heavy question.
It is.
But it's one that Bullwinkle doesn't shy away from exploring.
Right.
And that's what makes Headshot so compelling.
Mm,
It's not just a surface-level story about boxing.
right.
It's a deep dive into the complexities of human experience.
Absolutely. And one of the ways Bullwinkle achieves that depth is through her innovative use of language and structure.
Yeah.
We've already touched on her stream of consciousness narration, which allows us to get inside the characters' heads and experience their thoughts and emotions in real time.
It's like we're right there with them, feeling their anxieties, their doubts, their triumphs.
Exactly. And it's not just the narration. Bullwinkle also employs a lot of figurative language, particularly metaphors and similes,
Yeah.
to create vivid and often unsettling images.
Well, like how she describes Artemis's fighting style as a drip,
Yes.
slowly wearing down her opponents.
Yeah.
It's such a simple word,
Uh-huh.
but it perfectly captures the relentless, almost insidious nature of her technique.
Right. And that's another element that sets Bullwinkle apart as a writer.
Yes.
She's not afraid to experiment with language, to push boundaries and create something truly unique.
And it's effective, right?
It is.
I mean, it keeps you engaged.
Yeah.
Keeps you guessing and ultimately leaves a lasting impression.
Okay, I'm curious, is there anything else about Bullwinkle's writing style that stood out to you? Any moments in the novel that left you particularly moved or surprised?
You know what struck me is how Bullwinkle manages to balance this gritty, almost brutal depiction of boxing
Yeah,
with moments of tenderness and beauty.
I see what you mean. It would be easy to focus solely on the violence, the physicality of the sport,
Yeah.
but Bullwinkle goes beyond that. Yeah.
Exploring the nuances of these young women's lives,
Yeah.
their relationships, their dreams.
Exactly. Like there's this scene where Andi is reflecting on the accidental drowning she witnessed.
Uh-huh.
And she says, I wanted to scoop the water out of his lungs to replace it with air, with hope. It's such a heartbreaking image,
Yeah.
but there's also this underlying sense of compassion,
Right.
this desire to heal and make things right.
That's a powerful example, and it speaks to the broader theme of human connection that runs throughout the novel. These young women are all competing against each other, but there's also this underlying sense of camaraderie,
Yeah.
of shared struggle and resilience.
It's like they recognize something in each other, a reflection of their own hopes and fears.
And that recognition, that connection transcends the boundaries of competition. It speaks to a deeper human need for belonging and understanding.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of adversity, we can find solace and strength in each other.
And I think that's a message that resonates deeply with readers, especially in today's world.
Yeah. Where we're often bombarded with messages of individualism and self-promotion.
Right.
Headshot reminds us that vulnerability, empathy, and human connection are just as important, if not more so.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should keep in mind as they prepare for their book club meeting?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Headshot is not just a sports story.
Right.
It's a story about identity, ambition, and the complexities of human relationships.
And it's a story that invites us to question our own assumptions about gender societal expectations
Right.
and what it truly means to be strong and resilient.
Right, and it's a story that stays with you long after you've finished reading.
It does.
It makes you think, it makes you feel,
Yeah.
and it challenges you to see the world and yourself in a new light.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But before we step out of the ring,
Right.
I have one last question for you.
I all ears.
Thinking back on the novel as a whole, what do you think is the most thought-provoking aspect of Bullwinkel's work? What's that one thing that really stuck with you?
That's a tough one. There are so many layers to this novel, but I think what resonated most with me is Bullwinkel's ability to capture the universality of human experience
Okay.
through this very specific and often brutal setting.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure.
What do you mean by universality?
Well, on the surface, Headshot is a story about young women competing in a boxing tournament.
Right.
But beneath that surface lies a deeper exploration of themes that are relevant to all of us.
Yep.
Regardless of our background or circumstances.
Like what?
Like the search for identity, the struggle to reconcile our aspirations with our limitations, the desire for connection and belonging. These are all universal human experiences, and Bullwinkel uses the boxing ring as a metaphor to explore these themes in a visceral and thought-provoking way.
That's a great point. It's like she's saying that we all have our own battles to fight, our own rings to step into, and it's how we navigate those challenges that defines who we are.
And Headshot reminds us that there's beauty and strength to be found in the struggle and the vulnerability.
Right.
And in the connections we forge along the way.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. But before we let our listener go, let's give them a few things to ponder
Okay.
as they dive into Headshot.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to offer up some food for thought.
All right, so for our listener who's about to jump into Headshot for their book club, what's the one question they should keep in the back of their mind as they're reading?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the most intriguing thing to consider is which character's journey resonated with you the most and why.
Yeah.
Was it Artemis and her relentless pursuit of perfection?
Right.
Or maybe Undi's struggle to find agency in a world that feels out of control?
Or how about Rachel and her unapologetic embrace of her weirdness? I mean, who hasn't felt like they're wearing a metaphorical weird hat sometimes?
Exactly.
Or maybe it was Rose and her quiet but unwavering faith.
There's something so relatable about each of these characters, even in their flaws and contradictions. Thinking about which one resonated most deeply with you can really unlock a deeper understanding of the novel's themes and your own personal connection to the story.
It's like holding up a mirror to your own experiences, right?
Absolutely.
Seeing bits of yourself reflected in these characters and their struggles.
And another thing to ponder is how Bullwinkel's use of surrealism, especially those recurring water images,
Right.
adds to the emotional depth of the story.
Yeah, that water imagery is so powerful. Sometimes it feels ominous, like a looming threat, and other times it's almost poetic, this force of nature that both destroys and cleanses.
It definitely adds this layer of complexity and makes you think about how the past can feel like an undertow,
Right.
constantly pulling you back, even as you're trying to move forward.
Okay, and for those book club members who love to geek out on writing styles, what should they be paying attention to?
Well, Bullwinkel's use of stream of consciousness is definitely something to watch for. It's not a style you see every day, but it's so effective here. It's like getting this unfiltered glimpse into the character's thoughts and feelings.
All right.
Yeah.
You're right there in their heads, experiencing the world through their eyes. It makes the story feel so immediate, so real.
Exactly. And it's a great example of how Bullwinkle breaks away from traditional storytelling conventions to create something fresh and engaging.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about the cultural context.
Yeah.
How does Headshot challenge the traditional ideas about what it means to be feminine and how women can claim their own power?
That's a really important aspect of the novel. Bullwinkle places these young women in a space that's typically associated with masculinity, the boxing ring, and shows us that strength and resilience can take many forms.
It's not just about physical power, right?
Right.
It's about mental toughness, emotional intelligence, and the courage to be yourself, even when the world tells you to be someone else.
Exactly. And by portraying these characters with such depth and complexity, Bullwinkle challenges those narrow definitions of femininity and shows us that women can be strong, vulnerable, ambitious, and compassionate all at the same time.
So to wrap up our deep dive into Headshot, I think it's safe to say that this novel is more than just a boxing story. It's a coming-of-age tale, a psychological exploration of self-discovery, and a powerful meditation on identity, ambition, and the search for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic.
It's a knockout punch to the heart and mind, and it's a must-read for anyone who's ever felt like an underdog or who's dared to step into the ring and fight for their dreams, whatever those dreams may be.
Beautifully said. So to our listener, get ready to be challenged, entertained, and moved by Rita Bullwinkel's Headshot. And as always, happy reading.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of BookerCast. We hope you enjoyed diving into it as much as we did. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts on this episode.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this episode with your fellow book lovers. And let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. See you in the next deep dive. Bye for now, and happy reading.